Some conversations around the assassin came up recently, and while traps are definitely going to get a video for obvious reasons, a bit of a brainworm popped up after a conversation, and that is the Dragontail assassin. Mainly, this was surrounding three questions that were asked. 1. What Sundered Charm should it use, if any? 2. Is it viable without having to charge up Tiger Strike for every single pack? And 3. What are the alternatives for Lacerator or Solo Self-Found? So let's go through building this out from normal through hell, and what you'll want to look at along the way to answer these questions, as well as just have fun with this character in general, and why one of the best alternatives to Lacerator actually has a fairly different skill loadout. Starting out, the point of this build is generally to use two skills, Tiger Strike and Dragontail, a 40-point investment to make rather powerful tool since it can stack massive amounts of +% damage while transferring that into an area of effect fire damage skill. This means there is a lot of flexibility in what you end up pairing it with through normal, and you'll generally just be focusing on these two skills, and probably getting some of your token points and skills like Burst of Speed, Fade, Cloak of Shadows, and Mind Blast. The other advantage of actually using the combo, at least in Resurrected thanks to the 2.4 patch, is that as long as you have a charge, your finishing moves are auto-hit, so you will want to use this to your advantage until you get your chase gear in the end, since even though we will be investing in dexterity for max block later on, you are still a melee class, and missing can suck massively. For normal though, you won't need to worry much about this, just getting enough strength and dexterity for gear, which you will need more strength than you think, since you do want to be using Greaves or exceptional boots as soon as they're available at least, and then you want to dump the rest into life. As we get into Nightmare, if you're transferring gear, or Hell if you're doing Solo Self-Found, that's when you want to worry about dexterity. You might be tempted to go for energy right after getting Tail as well, but you should be able to maintain yourself well enough with the occasional mana potion so you don't have to waste points in this. As far as skill progression, if you don't want to use skill resets, I pretty much just play it like a Dragon Talon build with a lot of points in Tiger Strike to guarantee hits until I get to 18, and then go straight into the Dragontail skill for an explosive boom, which, since we don't really get too many physical immunes until Hell, can do plenty of damage and wipe things out pretty easily. Your gear choices in this should be the usual stealth armor with Tal and Eth and some plain old 2-socket armor, lore if you can find a soul rune in a 2-socket helm, since plus skills actually do help us out quite a bit, and the heaviest boots you can find, which is a bit of an oddity, but Greaves are a solid pick in normal, though you will want to go to exceptional and then eventually elite as soon as you can, since each tier does greatly improve the damage. That said, crafting some safety boots, since it uses the heaviest boot type, can be a solid standby until you find chase boots. For a perfect emerald, an Ort rune, and a jewel in magic boots, it can be pretty decent. And imbuing is, well, your second choice because it doesn't guarantee specific stats, like in this case, resists. Some other handy things to consider in normal: if you find a shale, you can shop a 2-socket shield in Act 2, preferably a kite, bone, or spiked shield, since they're all light shields, and you put a rhyme rune word in it for the Cannot Be Frozen, which is pretty important for this build and pretty much any melee build. And there's also rune words like Steel that are cheap to get and give you some speed to your attacks early on, with some decent mods like Open Wound and Mana per Kill. As we get into Nightmare, you want to keep getting your strength up to use those higher boots for more damage, since the higher the base, the more things like Tiger Strike will pump it up, and the higher Tiger Strike gets pumped, the better off your area of effect damage will be, since it scales off the just raw amount of physical damage you actually deal to the target. There sadly won't be much in the way of casual upgrades unless you get lucky and find some runes for something like Treachery. As far as mercenaries, it's not super critical, as any mercenary with insight will work fine, though this is starting to be the point where you can find stuff like Vile Husk, which is a great tool for Act 5 mercenaries, and pretty much any chance you have to either reduce enemy defenses or enemy physical resistance will be a big pickup here. And like later on, getting an Act 2 Might mercenary can be really handy in reducing your reliance on things like Tiger Strike, though it won't really alleviate the need until much later. Skill-wise though, we'll probably be finishing off our main skills and we'll want to start investing in our support and secondary skills, and this is where variants of this build diverge, since what weapon you're going to pursue as your chase gear determines a lot of this. For this variant, the one that I'm showing off on screen, that only really wants to use Tiger Strike on higher player counts or bosses. We'll be going for Fade and Shadow Master, and of course picking up any 1-point wonders we missed like Dragon Flight, Mind Blast, and Cloak of Shadows. For the more popular Lacerator builds, or maybe some of the odd alternatives, you'll be going Death Sentry, Burst of Speed, and your 1-point wonders again, since they don't have the double-edged sword my variant has with the Rest in Peace feature of Lawbringer. That said, for both versions, you can opt out of certain skills to get Venom for certain niche cases, but it usually won't make a massive difference for this particular build. For this Lawbringer variant, it's sacrificing Shadowmaster for it. For the Lacerator variant, it sacrifices some points in Burst of Speed for this. As we go into Hell, it's pretty much the same old story. Round out your skills, get those stats up to wear good boots, and find yourself some Monarchs with 4 sockets in them if you can. Your budget option will be Spirit, which is plus skills, resist, etc., and they're all nice to have, but you will want one stashed away for whenever you're pursuing your chase gear at the end. You'll also want to keep an eye out for 3-socket Phase Blades, which are thankfully pretty cheap since they're commonly only used for, well, 2 weapons. If you're lucky, you'll also be able to shop some gloves with plus martial arts and increased attack speed, but they're pretty dang rare, and even rarer will be the truly peak gloves for this build, crafted blood gloves with crushing blow, 20% increased attack speed, and plus 2 martial arts, which I unfortunately don't have any to show because I'm not that lucky, so I had to go for a substitution choice, which we'll see later on. Now for the chase gear, which answers those questions from the beginning. For the Sundering, we actually choose Fire Sundering, despite Fade actually being a really solid option for covering that physical resistance penalty, and even in spite of Dragontail's burst damage being based off of actual physical damage you deal. This is because it's much easier for us to consistently take advantage of the fire damage, and we can actually bypass most of the physical immunes in the game, with the exception of Insect Swarms and specific flavors of Frenzy-Tor and Succubus in Act 5. And for those, we can exploit them with this same item that lets us bypass all of the undead physical immune enemies, and even many of the physical resistant undead as well, and that is Lawbringer, which automatically sends enemy physical resistances to 0 if they're undead, even if they're naturally immune like ghosts. And it's ironically actually a semi-budget rune word in of itself. Now, the reason we want it in a Phase Blade is so we can get our attack speed up easily with the kick, and also because, well, it's indestructible so you can just whack things with it as much as you need. That said, if you are using Burst of Speed, you can actually use Lawbringer in alternate weapons just to change up the attack range and even include it in some more niche variants, though in testing, most of those were more flash than function and ended up fitting better with different combos. The rest of our gear will likely be a bit confusing as well. First off, the gloves, I went with Laying of Hands for the fire resistance and increased attack speed, though some crafted gloves can be orders of magnitude better than these. I just don't have a set like I said. But what you're looking for is a blood crafted set we mentioned earlier with that crushing blow, increased attack speed, and the plus martial skills. On the rings, I went with Ravenfrost for the Cannot Be Frozen, dexterity, and attack rating, and an old classic that I haven't broken out in literally months, the Dual Leech Ring, though generally the most important aspects of this are the attack rating and mana leech if you're wanting something a bit more budget, with stats and resist being handy additions. Boots are going to be one of 2 choices after you've upgraded past just using the rare or crafted heavy boots. If you went the Venom route on a build, you go with Shadow Dancers, but for me, I prefer Gore Riders, namely for the crushing blow, same base damage, and open wounds if you upgrade them. And no, don't worry about the Deadly Strike on any of this, it does not work for kicks, so it's a bit superfluous. So you could actually use upgraded Goblin Toes as a sort of cheaper alternative, but you may want to save your resources for upgrading the Gore Riders. For the belt, I'm using Verdungos, though pretty much any of the popular melee unique belts will work quite well, with this, String of Ears, and Thunder God's Vigor being the most popular. Even Nosferatu's Coil can be nice thanks to the slow effect, but it's a bit behind the big 3 unless you need one of its particular features. Moving up top, we have Cat's Eye Amulet for plus dexterity, increased attack speed, and for me, faster run walk to make up for the fact that I'm using Fade instead of Burst of Speed. With Burst of Speed, the argument for the main alternative High Lord's Wrath becomes a lot stronger. Sure, you don't get the Deadly Strike from it because, well, kicks, but the Lightning Resist plus skills and same attack speed boost work just as well if you need them. Rounding out the semi-predictable stuff, though one we'll talk about again in a minute, we have G-Face with a Fervor Jewel in it, just to top off my attack speed, hit recovery, and give us a little bit more crushing blow. The jewel in this one also has a low 30-ish boost to enhanced damage, which is an intentional choice for the goal of making this build not require the use of Tiger's Strike against standard foes, which is how we start solving the problem of that second question, and we finish it with the next 2 pieces of gear. Starting with Fortitude on the armor, providing us a number of solid mods, but more importantly, a 300% enhanced damage on our attacks, with the rest of it just being nice to haves. And the Cold armor actually helping us out a decent bit for defense later on, but it's not super essential, it's just we want that enhanced damage so we don't have to worry about getting it from Tiger Strike against trash foes. We stack this with our shield, which is sadly partially neutralized a bit by our weapon, and that is Phoenix, which can go up to 400% enhanced damage itself, and has a nice side effect of -% enemy fire resist, which we are taking advantage of with our Fire Sunder charm, and is also one of the reasons we're using an Infinity Mercenary with Conviction as well, which when combined gives us a fairly nice -45% fire resist when used together, with drastically higher numbers whenever it's used against non-immunes. Stack on that the Conviction plus our Cloak of Shadows makes it pretty much guaranteed that we will not miss these charge-up attacks, and the reduced target defense on Lawbringer also works on bosses at a reduced rate to further help that out, with the Decrepify shutting down any non-undead physical immunes, while the Sanctuary does the physical penetration on the undead that we mentioned earlier that makes it so easy to pop things like ghosts in one shot. Now, I did mention Lacerator earlier, and the Lacerator setups with Burst of Speed are still way better for higher player count games, and some would argue bosses, but it's not as drastic of a difference as you would think, especially if you want to go without having to charge up against every pack, mostly due to the still limited chance of amplified damage kind of cutting it back a little bit. It has a lack of undead resist piercing like we use with the Sanctuary aura, and the frankly somewhat annoying flee mechanic tied to it can be, well, irritating to say the least. Lawbringer in general will feel more consistent, despite Lacerator actually objectively being more powerful whenever you are going at higher player counts or against higher player count bosses. Some special notes though, if you want to go with a different weapon, you can always go with Reaper's Toll on your Mercenary, or even Vile Husk on an Act 5 Mercenary to get a different source of Decrepify or Amplify damage respectively, which does open up your weapon a little, but again it reduces your consistency with this build in areas with undead, but it is still viable and an endgame kind of nitpicking because it will work just fine. You can also lean into heavier fire damage if you know the area you're farming does not have some of the issues with physical immunes, by using things like Hand of Justice and Flickering Flame to further punch down enemy fire resistances, though you do give up consistency in a few areas. And some of the other special notes for this build, Grief is, well, useless for it. Sure, it's neat and such, and you can use it on a lot of melee classes, but you do not get the benefits from it here. So this is one of those select melee builds that really should not be using this weapon. And if you don't have minus fire resistance gear, or at the very least Infinity Mercenary, do not use the Fire Sunder charm. You will be better off with more plus martial skill charms at that point. And yes, we go with the martial arts skill charms in this, since it boosts both Tiger Strike's percent and the fire damage of Dragon's Tail, while sadly plus damage charms will do absolutely nothing for us, since it's all skill points that really boost us here, and those plus min plus max charms don't actually add to our attack damage. So do you run Lacerator for more raw damage but more chaotic gameplay, or do you prefer Lawbringer or some other weapon? Mention it down below, and if you want more looks at how builds have been affected by sundering, check out the video on screen now. And if you want to support the channel while getting the videos a day early without ads, check out the Patreon down below.